Lesson 6.1 is on relations and functions. And what we're going to talk about today isn't necessarily new things, but the way we think of them is going to be a little bit different. So a relation is a pairing of numbers in one set called the domain with numbers in another set called the range. Just a relationship. This number goes with this number. And how we represent that is with a ordered pair. So we've been dealing a lot with relations. Every time we graphed a point on a coordinate plane, we are dealing with a relation. We just didn't think of it that way. And so you have relation, and then we also have domain and range. This range is going to be different than your like mean, median, and mode range. But starting with the domain here, it's basically your inputs. Normally the x values. It's going to be the ones we input into a table or we input into an equation to get the outputs. And in this case, we call the set of all outputs the range. Normally that's going to be our y values. So we have one thing that goes in for an input. The set of all the inputs is the domain. One number getting out is an output. The set of all the outputs is the range. Again, just some different terminology we need to be familiar with. This problem says identify the domain and range of the relation represented by the table below, which shows the number of miles traveled after different numbers of hours driving. Don't overthink this stuff. Remember, we're doing stuff we already know how to do. We're just using different terminology. So basically, we just have to identify the domain and range. The domain is all the inputs. Now, I normally said that was x values, but there's no x values here. So since there's no x values here, we kind of look at what number we'd input. In this case, the number of miles is dependent on the number of hours driven. So if I said, hey, you drove 4 miles, or you drove for 4 hours, how many miles would that be? You'd say 210. Okay, so we're going to think of these as our inputs right here. And these as our output. So the domain is going to be these numbers right here. When you write the domain down, you write it in order, no repeats. Not that that's a problem here, but we'll see in other problems how we have to be careful. That's it. That's a domain. Range. Range is the set of all the numbers you get out, all the outputs. Since these are all outputs, we write them in order from least to greatest, no repeats. Domain, all the input values. Range, all the output values. Let's look at another example. This one says identify the domain and range of the relation. Remember, relations are represented by ordered pairs here. So if I want to look at my domain, I'm going to look at all my inputs, all my x values. And all we're doing is identifying them. So I have -5, 2, 4, and 0. Write them in order, no repeats. My smallest number is -5. There's 2 of them, but we just write it once. Then I have a 2, 4, and 0. 0 will come next, then 2, then 4. Remember, this is an input, this is an input, this is an input, input, input. The domain is a set of all the inputs. Now range is a set of all the outputs, in this case our y values. Again, write them in order, no repeats. So our smallest output is a -6, then -3, 0, 7, and 8. Again, don't overthink this. We're just trying to get used to new terminology. Because later on in graphs, later on in math, you'll be looking at a graph and you'll be asked to identify the domain. You have to understand that the domain is your inputs. The domain is the x values. And likewise, the same will be said about the range.